Okay, so ideally you can see my screen. As a question?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I'll start going through this. I do have at the end some demos, and we'll go from there. So yeah, that's good. Okay, so hi, I'm Zach. I like kites. You can follow me on Twitter. There's the email address. If you go to kite.zakzd.info, and I'm going to exit out of this, you have all of my resources that talk about everything that I do with kites. So on kite.zakzd.info, you have some selected photos. You have my new cell phone cap thing that I'm doing. You have previous presentations. You also have weather information, which is always good if you're learning about kites. Laws, which are unfortunately a necessary evil, but it's something you still have to worry about, and a bunch of other miscellaneous risks or links at the bottom. So we'll go over that again sort of a couple of times, so it'll be good. So first of all, thanks for understanding about last month. It's not fun to be sitting in a car repair shop, seeing your car up on the thing while you're supposed to be presenting. So thanks for understanding. A flat tire does cause a lot of damage. So these are the type of things I like doing. So like on the far right, one of the houses there is my parents' house where they live. In the center is the kite I used to take the photo, or the kite that lifted the Raspberry Pi up to take the photo. And on the left, that was one of the attempts that I made to have the kite. So that's basically a Raspberry Pi Zero underneath, with the sense hat on top and the camera attached to it. And the USB thing that's blue, that's a power source. So not the most elegant solution, but it worked, which is the important thing. I'll get to some other motivation factors behind this. So I like the idea of flying drones and taking photos of the ground. It's a really fun thing to do. If you look on the lower right, if you have time to read, that's an excellent book on more of the government side of doing this project. That's fun. Fun to read and sort of see historically how these things were done and how it basically started with balloons, then I went to kites, and it sort of went on from there. The other thing I liked was I was low altitude portion of having a bird-like view is cool, and it's also challenging and just sort of fun to do because you're really reliant on things external for things to work right. So it's like every time you fly, it's sort of like you're not really sure if it will work until you sort of look at the photos back at the ground. It's just a cool thing to do. And I should mention there's a full-time community of people that are doing this. They primarily deal with architectural type, or not architecture, looking at the ground, looking at the buildings on the ground, doing historical digs. The people that do that, dig for dinosaurs, they're the type of people that have done this in practice a lot, because generally speaking, they wanted to have a view from the ground. The issue was that looking that they generally speaking don't have a lot of money to do stuff, so something that's a kite is free. The other thing is that if it crashes, they don't want anything to damage where they are, so the kite is sort of a natural low risk type environment. So that's good. And yeah, good things. So generally speaking, this is the type of the bill of materials as to what I'm doing. So you can have the A+ or the Pi 0. I personally prefer the A+, just because of the fact that the camera seems to be a lot easier to connect than the Pi 0. Your mileage may vary, but like in the previous talk, when they were talking about soldering things and desoldering things, my hands are sort of much more fist-like, where like in theory, like I should be able to solder, but quite often I end up just throwing money away. So I've decided to stop soldering and let other people do it. So based on that, I like having a plug it in and it works type solution. So add in the camera, a power pack, a sense hat, an SD card. You're looking at about $110 for this, which isn't inexpensive, but it's not too expensive. So it's in the reasonable hobby type thing. 110 is probably, I'm guessing, 90-ish pounds on a good day. But yeah, insert money conversion here as well. The kite itself, that can cost you anywhere from a lot of money to not quite so much money. I've done it before, and I've had multiple rigs, which I'll be describing in a second. But basically, you need to have a kite. You need to have some large gauge wire. That's largely to just connect the kite to the kite line. I'm going to see if I can bring up the two chat things here, if it's important. Oh, that went away. Okay. So I'll get to the questions afterwards. Also, you want some small gauge wire. That's just generally so if you have like a wire frame of some sort or something that you can reuse between flights, you really need to have everything sort of connected together. So the rigs cost different depending on how you're trying to do it. The total is about $65 just to get whatever you have up in the rig, plus the cost of the kite. Now it seems like the cost of the kite would be a one-time expense, but it turns out you buy a lot because they crash and crash hard. So it's an ongoing expense, but not too terrible. My wife hasn't complained too much yet. So the incredibly easy version 1 of the code was essentially just a cron tab entry, which was recipe still, grab my camera.jpg. And that sort of worked with the caveat that, so this was the first platform, and what happened with the first platform was that it ended up going to taking a nailed dive into the ocean, and it was never seen from again. So, and also as I didn't have a code backup, things happen, you learn, and now we have platform 2. So platform 2, if found, that's a very important sticker. So if someone does find it, they can call you. And I used an acrylic-based platform for this. That worked reasonably well. With the caveat that I had was that because I didn't have a sense hat, it just didn't quite, there was no way to detect when it was shaking. So there was a lot of blurry photos that way. So because of the blurry photos, like it worked, like that was like 1 out of roughly 500 photos I took, on one particular day. And the photo and the person in the blue on the left, if you can see that, that's my wife. Platform 3. So this time I actually wrote Python code and to use sensors and lights on the Pi to sort of say, hey, I'm booted, and hey, I'm starting to take photos. And I did try to make it so there would be more of an enclosure, so hopefully nothing would get damaged, till it crashed. And at that point, because it was made of acrylic, it had a lot of sharp points. So I do not recommend doing this. So in order to go for something softer, platform 4 was actually paper-based. And again, we have the if found, please call number. And it held everything together pretty well. So I was happy with that. The caveat was two things. The first was that, as you can sort of see on the right-hand side there, the paper became ripped after it was used. And it actually was, I believe the kite was actually holding onto it was being held together via the Raspberry Pi itself. The cord connecting Raspberry Pi and the USB cord. So as we try not to destroy things, that's probably not a great solution long term. The other thing was that the car, when it came down, the car stock was ripped. So I needed to find a better platform. And I will say though that did work. So these are two more photos. On the left you have a picture of the beach, which I tried to adjust for white color balance, but didn't quite work out. And it's similar, like it's still impressive to see those photos. It's fun. So this was platform number 5. And I tried to do multiple things with it. I really liked the idea of this platform, as it was something that was definitely reusable. However, there was 2 issues that this one had as well. The first was that balsa wood, when it gets wet, becomes heavier. So as a result, when it's hot and humid outside, it wants to drag on the ground because it just gets heavier. So the kite doesn't have enough force to lift it up. The other thing was that metal rust. So if you're going to the beach and you want to have a reusable platform, it just doesn't really work that well. But it worked reasonably well. So this was a photo really close to the beach of where I launched the kite. So it did work well. I'm really happy with this photo. Here's a photo in DC, slightly above the ground. Yeah, this was something that had a good potential for working. So I'm going to try something new. So I'm going to put the camera on me for a second here. So cool. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, now hopefully you can see me in the teeny tiny screen capture. So I have here a teeny tiny phone. This is a palm phone, which is like literally palm sized. So it has a camera on it. It has a accelerometer on it, and it also runs something called JavaScript. So because it has everything that we sort of need to have a computer which is lightweight and can be attached to a kite, and it was only $80, I think, on eBay. So like for all of those reasons, as compared to building my own thing with the Raspberry Pi, like while I love the Raspberry Pi and I use the Raspberry Pi heavily, I'm going to try doing it with this summer, which I haven't quite gone to obviously because of COVID, but when the next time I can take a vacation, I'm bringing this with a kite and crossing fingers. So And to that point, I'm going to go back here and share my screen. Are you sure you want to share your screen? Yes, yes, I am. Okay. So if you decide to go to kite.zakz.info and click on the cell phone cap link, and you have an Android cell phone only, it will not work with Apple. If you click on Start Capture and you give it permissions to view your camera, you can then have code that will basically check to see if your camera is moving, and after 10 seconds, it will take a photo using your primary camera. And when you're done, you can hit stop and then hit download, which will download a zip archive of your photos to your desktop. I'm going to see how it works. I'm still waiting to test it just because, like, the only time it sort of gets windy in Virginia is during thunderstorms, which we don't want to mix. Excuse me. So, to be done. Some of the highlights of the project was I was able to write my first Python code. So I'm a heavy Perl user and I do all sorts of weird things with Perl. But Python, it was the first one, so I have my GitHub page that does that. And I basically started using a sense hat, and I did some math with Python to determine if we're shaking or not, which I believe is on the next page. Yeah, so to determine if we're shaking or not, we're taking the square root of the accelerometer reading between two time periods very close together. And so it doesn't really matter how quickly it's called, other than it's not at the same time. Because basically what you want to do is, if you're moving in an X in two different directions and the vector between is large, then you know that you're moving in a wild direction. But if you if that number is small, then you're not really moving much in any direction. So you can sort of check to see, you can sort of have that work out, and it works out pretty well. So basically, if you're not shaking, you want to take a photo. If you are shaking, then don't take a photo. And also, the other way of doing it is if you are shaking and you have a counter that is decremented from 1,000 to 0, take a photo anyway, because who knows what you're doing, and just try again. So that's what my cat code does. Oops, I'm sorry. Did not mean to press that button. Okay. I do recommend, if you have a Delta kite, that's a kite that has a lot of lift. There are some minor caveats with it, which is that if the kite has a firm structure, so the issue with a firm structure is if you're trying to, say, put it on a plane, you sort of have to hope that none of the things inside the kite sort of break from tension or crash or bag handlers. So it's not as easy to move, but it does work well. And I'll show you a couple of the kites I have here in a bit. The other thing is that if you're looking to fly a kite for doing this type of photography, you want to not do it when it's too strong or too low. But if you can start to hear the wind in your ears, that's generally the time when you want to start flying your kite. So I'm in the DC area, so I'm going to talk about safety laws and other laws. The lower comment is sort of how I feel about it, but it's important to still learn what the laws are of where you are. So this is a map of the DC Special Flight Rules area. So the area in red, you cannot fly any drones. However, kites explicitly are permitted. So because of that, like basically, and since my home used to be right near the center of the dot, I couldn't fly a drone, but I could fly a kite, so that's where I came up with this idea to do this. The other thing is that in the national park system, drones are prohibited, but kites again are permitted. So it's a way to get around the laws while sort of still being able to take aerial photography, which is fun. Yeah. So this is actually a post by the FAA. The FAA is our flight administrator type people. And they say explicitly that while you cannot bring your drone, you can bring your kite. So it's an excellent thing to be able to do that. So since you're not in the US, it's probably not too much, but like if you do decide to go to US and you decide to fly a kite, just obey the no kite signs. Don't make your kite go higher than 400 feet. There are, particularly on Amazon, some sellers that offer like 1,000 feet for kites, or a kite line. You don't want to do that because it's illegal if a kite were to get beyond 400 feet. And while the kite is not a huge risk to an airplane, like it still poses a risk, particularly for helicopters and other people like that. So anyways, just to say that it's not completely not risky. So yeah, I did not realize that was my last slide, but that was my last slide, so that's good. So I'm going to now just show some casual things. So stop sharing. So I'm going to show for size. This was one of the kite. This is how I can't compare down one of the kite sensors. This is the one that I have where it has a LiPo battery. It has the SunSat, the Raspberry Pi. It has a convenient switch. So I can just press a switch and turn it on. This is all by USB magic. So it works. It has a little camera, but like the lift is the harder part because like while it's not too heavy, like maybe all of 10 grams, like that's still a lot of effort for a kite to actually be able to lift, particularly if it gets heavy.
I have a question about that, Zach.
Yes, go for
it. Yes, so I saw the Sense head, and when you just switched it on, I saw 64 LEDs lit up. Why do you have so many? Why do you have LEDs in the first place? Because if the kite is 100 meters in the air, 400 feet, it doesn't.
You're not going to be able to see it. Yeah.
Oh, you're like, able to see it. Ah, it's not
what the Sense Hat has is it has all the sensors on it. So we don't really need the LEDs. We just really need the sensor. So it has the barometric, so you know how high up you are. It has also the acceleration to let you know if it's shaking or not.
Okay.
So that way you'll only take good photos when it's not shaking.
I understand. But isn't weight important? Because
yes. And like I could directly, so this goes back to my thing where I'm unable to solder. So if I was able to solder things better, then I could probably directly attach a accelerometer without the weight of the SunSat. But it's a little shortcut.
Yes, understand.
So, yep.
Thanks.
So while I'm at it, in case anyone's interested, I guess I do have kites. Like this is the Prism kite. This is they have a model called Isotope, which is based on the radio antenna kite that was used by the French in World War II for radio communications. So instead of having radio towers, they would just lift the kite and have it. Yeah, and this is like a soft kite, which is a parafoil. which is good for transportation, but it doesn't really have enough lift to actually lift the kite. So these things are all fun for experimenting, and it's so not my day job. It's awesome.
Zach, I've got a quick question for you. So you talked about a good indicator for knowing how much wind is out there to fly your kite. Have you got the reverse, which is when there's too much wind, you really don't want to be flying your kite?
So generally, if the house is shaking, that's when you don't want to do it. So, and I can be explicit here because like where I go is to Cape Cod, and like basically that's when like, yeah, if it starts shaking, that generally means like it's over 30 miles per hour winds, and like your kite line will rip. So what you can do is sort of cheat and get basically kite line that will have heavier braking strength. But the issue there is that like that line is actually heavier because it has that extra strength. So because of that, it'll have less length, less ability to, it's just heavier for the kite to lift up. So everything's a trade-off. It's a wonderful system of systems to sort of figure out, oh, I didn't think about that, but I'll take that into account for next year. So it's been a fun hobby.
One final question.
Yes.
No, you go.
Zach, you know that foam that is used for installing windows in houses?
When the foam that's used for installing windows in houses?
It's a spray can foam. I think it's called PU foam.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's sort of firm but not rigid. I saw a demo of a mobile phone that was never released. It had a case with a small amount of foam all around the sides. They were chucking it out of moving cars. They couldn't kill the thing.
That would be awesome. Okay, I will remember that for next time when I'm looking at this. That'd be an excellent idea. Very, very, very cool.
One final question, Zach. Sorry, it's Ramesh again. So,
oh yeah, go for
it. So you talked about no-fly zones for drones and planes, right? Because of the special area. Let's just leave it at that.
Yes.
Have you ever thought of actually flying higher somewhere else? I mean, is there another location? I'm just trying to work out what's the real restrictions there.
So because of the fact that I work from the government and I cannot have an arrest record, I have not done that. However, like it's one of those things where will 98% of the people care? No. Like the absolute worst I heard that someone got in trouble with a kite was that someone decided to have a kite that went up 1,000 feet, and he left it up there like 24 hours a day for about 3 weeks until the FAA came and told him to take it down. So it's probably, you'll be fine. But the other thing too that becomes hard is the other thing that becomes hard is that at some point, like the ropes will break. So like there's an interesting astrophysics as well, or physics, or what's the correct word? So like so yes, you can try it, but I have not tried it. And but yeah, should be able to. Like I believe in the UK, it's only 300 feet you're allowed to go up. So it's even shorter.
Yeah, so I guess this comes down to what you said earlier, which is the higher you go, the longer the string, wire, whatever you call it, the heavier it will get. Yes, then that's your limitation. Okay, thank you.
Yep, and there definitely are like places that have a lot of lift, and like so after the Delta model, which there's also like the one that I newly had. It's basically a box kite, but it also is in the shape of a Delta kite. So The box kite helps when the winds are slow, and a delta kite is fast when, or is better when the winds are fast. So you sort of have the best of both worlds. There's also other kite designs such as the octonial, I think it's called, where it's like this 8-sided weird thing where like you have a ton of lift, but it's just so complicated. So sort of depends on what your mission is, I guess.
Thank you.
So fun though.
Have you looked playing around with balloons?
With Bluetooth?
Balloons rather than
balloons.
kites.
I have been inspired by the balloon, the high altitude balloons, but I'm not far enough away from the DC area that I wouldn't want to go up and sort of explode over, or not explode, but what was it called?
Decompress.
Yeah, I guess explode. Rapid release. There you go. Of all the hydrogen over like someplace where they actually care about, and then it comes back to me. So but I think what they want you to do is to be like basically 200 miles away, just so you're not directly over this area, which makes sense. I know. So in addition to balloons, though, there's also you can get permission to do pipes. So basically, you just take a long drainage pipe, which is generally 32 feet or so, and then you can lift that up in the air. That's another way of cheating to get some height. It really sort of depends what you want to do. It's a fun topic.
London's pretty hard anyway, because most of London is a restricted zone.
Yes.
You're really lucky where I am, which is where 3 restricted zones actually cross. So,
very cool. Yeah, for doing that, I would look into probably doing a pipe type thing. So essentially, what you're doing is you're just taking like a plumber's pipe and swinging it up, making sure that there's nothing around, and that's technically speaking, you're not flying. Like there may still be rules against it, but like that's probably where I would start. Like if you go to that California webpage, the Berkeley Kite Society, they will point you in the direction of what you can do in the UK.
Zach, whilst the FAA may allow you to fly your kite, I wonder, whilst they allow you to fly your kite, I wonder if they would be so keen if they knew you were taking photographs.
I think the FAA only cares about the airspace. They don't really care about the privacy implications. Like the other thing is like there still may be other people that care, but the other thing is that your camera, when you're looking down, it makes everything appear like a dot. So I think it would be reasonably salient just to say that that you're really taking photos of the landscape from higher altitudes, which is really what you're doing. And that way you can sort of not really bypass, but you can sort of you can talk to that point. I have not seen in the kiting community the same types of concerns I've seen in the drone community when it comes to privacy violations.
Yeah, I've stopped flying my drone because there's just so many rules now. It's just, you have to go to a really wild, open area to fly a drone, and then there's no point because you can't take a photograph of anything.
Yeah, I understand that. That makes it hard. Like that's like as at least in the U.S. you're still allowed to do that. Over private property, that's something a little bit different. Like they do care more. Like if you're flying over your neighbor house, depending on the jurisdiction you live in, So like in Texas, there was a lawsuit brought against a neighbor that was flying a drone, but not so much in other areas. So I think like at least how I fly, like I fly up to about basically the maximum, so that I can just basically doing like neighborhood type photography as compared to individual houses. But yeah, it's all good.
Thanks a lot, Jack. It's really interesting. Really enjoyed that.
This was quite fun, and thanks for understanding about last month too.
Not a problem at all.
Well,
cool. So we're done like the formal presentations. Anyone want to bring anything up? Anything you're wondering about, or anything that you need to get some advice on? Anyone work on anything interesting?
Yeah, I've got a question. Sorry, I've got a question for Zak. You said you use the accelerometers on the sense hat to know when to take the camera, take the photo. How does that work, and how much trial and error did you do on it?
So what I did was I Googled how to check to see if you're shaking. And that led me to the accelerometer route. So there was actually a lot of work basically trying to see like if you're shaking your Android device, like turn on a light. I was like, oh, I can use the formula in reverse to see if you're not shaking. So instead of looking for a small value, they were a large value to see if they're shaking. It's just a small value. So what was the second part of the question?
And how much, obviously you put your formula up there, but how much trial and error? Was it trial and error to actually work out what the values were which worked? Yes,
so I looked to see what theirs was, and I took a guess. And then it probably took about 3 more times for me to refine it enough so that I could have a reasonably steady photo.
Yeah.
Like the other thing is that each camera is different. So one of the things I'm slightly concerned about trying it with the small phone I have here is that the Android phone is a lot, slower to take photos. So because of that, I actually had to reduce the amount of time, or reduce that number by a little bit, because while the Raspberry Pi wouldn't care, because it took the photos reasonably quickly, it took a lot longer than the other one. So trial and error, probably over a course of 3 months.
Yeah, trial and error is a good way of working things out. And I did wonder also, sometimes you might have rotation. Did you ever use a gyroscope and look at the gyroscope or not? Because obviously rotation wouldn't measure the accelerometer changing too much.
So the accelerometer was able to detect it because I was looking at the X, Y, and Z axis, because the Raspberry Pi does allow you to have the 3 dimensions for acceleration. So it's still able enough to cheat. And I'm reasonably confident. I was looking at the accelerometer, not the other option they were giving you, but regardless, the math still works.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at the squares of the distance stuff, but it's all good.
Talking about movement, I did notice that your balsa wood frame was suspended from the edge. And it reminded me that camera gimbals support the camera as close to the center of gravity as they can get. So I don't know if that's something that you could copy.
That was, yes. So speaking of the community, that's not me. What they have gimbals that basically are doing that for kites. But that's basically, instead of using a Raspberry Pi, they're using like a standard Sony camera, which has a very well-defined center of the gravity. So the answer here is yes, and I cross my fingers as I'm doing this. Basically what I do is I held it up, checked to see if it obviously tilted in either direction, which it didn't, so it was close enough to me. Yes, here we go. Awesome.
Cool. So there's nothing else, so we'll call it there.
Yep.
We'll start looking for the next month.